The boy had always known that life was hard, but he never imagined it could become this cruel. Every day, he watched his mother grow weaker, her body fighting an illness she could not afford to treat. Their small house was quiet, except for the sound of her labored breathing. She tried to smile at him, tried to act strong, but he could see the truth in her tired eyes. She was in pain, and time was running out. He was too young to carry such a heavy burden, but there was no one else. His father had passed away years ago, leaving them with nothing but memories and a few old photographs. His mother worked small jobs to keep them fed, but her illness had taken away her strength. Now even standing for too long left her gasping for air. Doctors had told him there was hope, but only if she received treatment, and the cost of that treatment was more money than he could ever dream of having. The boy walked the streets day after day, looking for someone who would listen. He went to relatives, knocking on their doors, begging for help. Most of them shook their heads, saying times were tough for everyone. Some offered him kind words, but no money. Others closed the door quickly, not wanting to hear his story. He left each house with his heart heavier than before, but he refused to stop. His mother's life depended on it. He tried to do small jobs, cleaning shops, carrying heavy bags for strangers, anything that might bring in a few coins. He skipped meals so his mother could eat. He collected bottles and scraps from the roadside, hoping to sell them for a little money. But the numbers never added up. Even if he worked for months, it would not be enough. The hospital demanded a large amount immediately, and the boy's hands were empty. One night, he sat beside his mother's bed, holding her frail hand. She whispered that she didn't want to be a burden, that maybe it was time to let go. Tears filled his eyes, and he shook his head fiercely. He promised her he would find a way. He told her she was all he had, that he would never give up on her. His mother pressed his hand weakly, her eyes glistening with love and sorrow. That night, he did not sleep. He stayed awake, thinking, praying, and hoping for a miracle. The next morning, he set out again, his clothes worn, his shoes scuffed from endless walking. The sun beat down on him, but he kept going, stopping people on the street, explaining his mother's situation. Some gave him pitying looks, others waved him away. Hours passed and his legs ached, but he couldn't stop. His voice grew hoarse from repeating the same plea over and over. Just when he was about to collapse from exhaustion, he saw her. A woman, older, with lines of sadness carved into her face, was sitting quietly outside a small shop. She had a simple black scarf wrapped around her head, and her hands rested in her lap. There was something about her presence that made him pause. She looked like someone who understood pain, someone who carried her own share of sorrow. The boy approached her slowly, his voice trembling as he explained his mother's condition. At first, she listened in silence, her eyes fixed on him. He expected her to do what most people did, shake her head, say sorry, and walk away. But she didn't. She asked gentle questions, her tone filled with concern. She wanted to know about his mother, about how long she had been sick, about what the doctors had said. As he spoke, he noticed the way her eyes softened, as if his words had touched something deep within her. She nodded quietly, and when he finished, there was a long pause. The boy stood there nervously, clutching the strap of his worn bag, waiting for her answer. He felt his chest tighten, preparing himself for disappointment once again. But instead of walking away, the woman reached into her handbag. She pulled out an envelope and pressed it into his hands. The boy stared at it, confused, until she told him to open it. His eyes widened when he saw the stack of money inside. It was more than he had ever seen in his life. His voice cracked as he whispered, asking why she would do this for him. The woman looked at him with a faint smile. She told him she was a widow and she knew what it felt like to lose someone you love. She said no child should have to stand helpless while his mother suffered. She explained that money comes and goes, but life once gone never returns. She told him to take it and save his mother. The boy's hands shook as he held the money. Tears streamed down his face, and he dropped to his knees in gratitude. He promised her that one day he would repay her kindness, no matter how long it took. She touched his shoulder gently, telling him not to think about repayment, only about saving his mother. That day, as the boy ran toward the hospital, clutching the envelope, his heart was filled with a new kind of hope. For the first time in weeks, he believed that his mother might live. And deep inside, he carried a vow that he would never, ever forget the woman who gave everything to a boy she had just met. Asterisk. The boy's legs carried him faster than he thought possible. His hands clutched the envelope tightly against his chest, terrified that if he loosened his grip, the money might vanish like a dream. The streets blurred around him, and all he could think about was his mother. By the time he reached the hospital, his chest was burning, and sweat poured down his face. He didn't care. He had hope in his hands, and he wasn't about to waste a single second at the hospital counter. The boy laid the money down with trembling fingers. The staff, who had seen his desperate visits before, looked at him with wide eyes. He explained in a rush that he had the payment now, that they had to save his mother immediately. Nurses moved quickly, arranging for her to be taken into treatment. The boy stood there helplessly as doctors and nurses worked around his mother, but inside his chest, his heart beat with something it hadn't felt in a long time: relief. Hours passed in a blur. He sat in the waiting area, his clothes damp with sweat, his fingers still clutching the envelope, though it was now nearly empty. His eyes darted to the doors every time they swung open, desperate for news. Finally, a doctor approached, his expression softer than before. He told the boy that his mother was stable, that the treatment had been successful for now. The boy felt his knees weaken, tears filling his eyes. For the first time in weeks, the crushing fear that he might lose her lifted from his chest. When his mother regained consciousness, her voice was weak but clear. She asked how it was possible, how he had managed to find the money. He held her hand and told her about the woman, the widow who had given him more than money. She had given him his mother back. His mother's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered a prayer for the stranger's kindness. Days turned into weeks as his mother slowly recovered. The boy stayed by her side, helping with meals, fetching water, and making sure she never felt alone. Each time he looked at her, he remembered the widow. Her face, her quiet voice, the sadness in her eyes, all of it remained etched in his memory. He longed to see her again, to thank her properly, but he didn't even know where she lived. She had simply appeared in his life like an angel and then faded back into the crowd. Life began to change. His mother regained her strength, though she still had to be careful. The boy took on small jobs again, but now his purpose felt different. He wasn't only working for survival. He was working for the future. Every time he earned a coin, he remembered the widow's sacrifice. She had trusted him, a boy she barely knew, with her hard-earned savings. He carried that weight proudly, like a promise stitched into his heart. The widow, meanwhile, returned to her simple life. She had given away more money than she could easily afford, but she felt no regret. When she thought of the boy's desperate eyes and his trembling hands, she knew she had done the right thing. Her own life had been filled with loss. Her husband had been gone for years, leaving her with nothing but quiet evenings and lonely mornings. She lived modestly, saving what little she could, but her heart was never hardened by the world. That day, when she heard the boy's story, it felt like she was being tested and she had chosen to act, yet she never expected to see him again. In her mind, the chapter was closed. She had given what she could, and life would move on. She had no idea that the boy she helped would one day return, carrying with him a story of his own. As the months passed, the boy grew stronger. His mother encouraged him to study, reminding him that knowledge was the key to rising above poverty. He listened to her advice, throwing himself into his lessons. He worked during the day and studied by candlelight at night. His friends sometimes teased him, but he didn't mind. He carried a vision in his heart. He wanted to become someone who could give back, just like the widow. Every time life felt too hard, he remembered that moment when she pressed the envelope into his hands. It wasn't just money she had given him. She had given him proof that kindness still existed in the world. That memory became his fuel, his guiding light. Years later, people would look at him and see a man who rose from nothing. But at that moment, he was still just a boy, holding on to the miracle of his mother's survival and the promise he had made to himself. A promise that one day, no matter how long it took, he would find the widow again. He would show her that her sacrifice had not been wasted. He would repay her not just with words, but with actions that would change her life, just as she had once changed his. The story of the widow's sacrifice did not end with the money she gave. It had only just begun. And while neither of them knew it yet, fate was quietly working to bring them back together in ways neither could have imagined. Asterisk. The boy's life slowly began to take a new shape after his mother's recovery. Their small home, once filled with silence and fear, now carried the soft sounds of laughter and conversation. His mother was not completely free from weakness, but she had regained enough strength to cook meals, tend to small chores, and even hum little tunes as she worked. For the boy, each of these simple moments felt like a miracle. He often thought about the woman who had made it possible. In his mind, she was more than just a kind stranger. She was a guardian who had stepped in when the world turned its back on him. Though he could not find her again, her face lived in his memory, and the weight of her generosity pushed him to dream bigger than he ever had before. School became his anchor. He knew that if he wanted to repay her kindness, he needed to rise higher than the poverty he was born into. Every lesson, every book, every late-night study session became part of his plan. His teachers noticed the determination in his eyes. While other children were distracted or lazy, he carried himself with the seriousness of someone who had already seen too much of life's hardships, but determination alone was not enough. He still had to work. In the mornings before school, he would sweep the streets for shopkeepers. After classes, he carried goods in the market. At night, he sat under a dim light, his textbooks open, his mind refusing to give in to exhaustion. His friends sometimes mocked him, saying he was wasting his youth on books. He only smiled and shook his head. They didn't know what he knew, that knowledge was his only ticket to a better life. His mother watched him with pride. She often reminded him to rest, worried that he was carrying too much. But when she saw the fire in his eyes, she remained quiet, letting him chase his dream. She knew his hard work was fueled by something deeper, a silent vow he had made, one she had overheard him whisper late at night when he thought she was asleep. He had promised to repay the kindness that saved them. Years passed, and the boy grew into a young man. His persistence began to bear fruit. He won small scholarships, enough to cover school fees and buy better books. Teachers recommended him for opportunities, impressed by his discipline. Slowly, he began to step into a future brighter than the one he had once imagined. Still, he never forgot the widow. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, he wondered what had become of her. Did she live alone? Was she healthy? Did she regret giving him that money? He longed to see her again, to tell her that her sacrifice had not been wasted, but she remained out of reach. All he had was her memory, and that was enough to keep him moving forward. By the time he finished his studies, he was no longer the helpless boy who had once run through the streets, clutching an envelope. He was strong, confident, and ready to face the world. His first job came with long hours and little pay, but he embraced it with gratitude. He was determined to climb step by step, no matter how slow the climb. Each paycheck reminded him that he was moving closer to a goal that went beyond his own life. His mother, though still fragile, encouraged him constantly. She reminded him that the best way to honor the widow was not only through success, but also by living with the same spirit of kindness. "Never forget where you came from," she told him. And never turn away from someone who needs help, the way others once turned away from us. Those words became his second promise. The first was to repay the widow. The second was to never let another soul feel as hopeless as he once had. The young man began saving money little by little. He resisted the temptation to spend on himself. Every coin set aside was a reminder of his vow. He didn't yet know how or when he would find her, but he was certain that day would come. Life had a way of bringing people back together, and he believed their paths would cross again. And though he could not see it, fate was indeed moving silently, preparing the moment when his journey and hers would meet once more. For now, he focused on building himself up, brick by brick, step by step, with her face still shining in the back of his mind like a guiding star. Years slipped by, and the boy had become a man. The world around him had changed, and so had he. His back was straighter now, his voice carried confidence, and his clothes no longer looked worn or patched. He had worked his way through one struggle after another, slowly climbing into a life of stability and dignity. But inside him, the same boy still lived, the one who had once run through the streets with an envelope of hope clutched to his chest. That memory never faded. He had built a career that gave him respect, and people around him saw him as someone dependable. Yet behind his success was a silent promise, a vow he had carried for years. Every time he looked at his mother, who now smiled more often than she coughed, he thought of the woman who had saved her. He had told himself countless times that he would find her one day, no matter how long it took. He wanted her to see with her own eyes that her kindness had not been wasted. The opportunity came in the most unexpected way. One evening, while attending a community gathering, he overheard a conversation among two older women. They were speaking softly about a widow who lived on the edge of town. She had grown frail with age and had little to her name. They said she spent most of her days alone, sitting by the window of her small house, watching life pass her by. Something in their words struck him deeply. He asked them her name, and when they said it, his heart skipped a beat. It was the same name he had heard all those years ago, the same woman who had pressed an envelope into his trembling hands. He couldn't sleep that night. His heart pounded with excitement and nervousness. For so many years, he had dreamed of this moment, imagined how it would feel to stand before her again. Would she even remember him? Would she believe that the boy she once helped had kept his promise? Morning couldn't come fast enough. The next day, he went searching. The directions he had been given led him down quiet streets lined with trees that had grown tall with age, their branches bending low as if bowing to time itself. Finally, he reached a modest little house with peeling paint and a broken fence. The windows were open, and through the thin curtains he could see an old woman sitting silently in a chair. Her hair was silver, her back slightly bent, her hands folded neatly in her lap. He stood there for a moment, his breath caught in his throat. After all these years, here she was, the woman who had given him hope when the world had turned away. He knocked softly on the door. The sound echoed through the quiet home, and after a few moments she appeared, moving slowly, leaning a little on her cane. She looked at him with tired eyes, the kind that had seen too much of life. For a moment, she did not recognize him. Why would she? He was no longer the thin, desperate boy she had once met. He was a grown man now, standing tall and strong. But when he spoke, his voice carried the same trembling sincerity she had once heard. He reminded her of the day in front of the shop, of the envelope, of the words she had spoken to him. He told her how her kindness had saved his mother's life. Her eyes widened and tears welled up almost instantly. Slowly, her hand reached for his arm, as if to make sure he was real. She remembered. She remembered the boy with the pleading eyes, the one she thought she would never see again. She whispered that she had often wondered what became of him, whether his mother had survived, whether her sacrifice had made any difference. He held her hand gently and told her everything, how his mother had recovered, how he had studied, how he had worked tirelessly, and how every step of his journey had been guided by the promise he made that day. He told her that her sacrifice had been the seed that grew into everything he was now. And then, with a voice thick with emotion, he told her he had not come empty-handed. He had arranged a gathering at the town hall that very evening, and he asked her to come. She hesitated, unused to attention, but he insisted with such warmth that she finally agreed. That night, under the soft glow of lights, the widow walked into the hall. She was surprised to see the room filled with people, many of them waiting eagerly. When her eyes met his, standing at the center, she understood. He stepped forward and took her hand, leading her to the front. With the crowd watching, he told his story, the story of a poor boy who once had nothing, who had been turned away by everyone, until a widow gave him more than money. She gave him hope. He pointed to her and told them all that she was the reason he was alive, the reason his mother had survived, the reason he stood where he did today. The room grew quiet, then erupted in applause. The widow, overwhelmed, covered her face with her hands as tears streamed down her cheeks. She had never imagined that her act of kindness, something she had thought was small and fleeting, had created a ripple that changed a life forever. And for the first time in years, she no longer felt invisible or forgotten. She felt honored, cherished, and deeply loved. The applause in the hall went on for a long time. The widow sat there in disbelief, her frail hands trembling as she tried to wipe away her tears. She had lived quietly for so many years, thinking her life had little meaning left. Yet now she realized that her single act of kindness had not only saved a boy, but had built a future she could never have imagined. When the noise finally settled, the young man turned to her with a gentle smile. His voice carried across the room as he said that kindness was a debt he had never forgotten. He looked into her eyes and promised that today was the day he would begin to repay it. The crowd listened closely, some already moved to tears by the way he spoke with such raw gratitude. He guided her to the front of the stage and revealed what he had prepared. Behind him, a large screen lit up with photos of the boy he once was, of his mother recovering, of his journey through school and work. Each picture told the story of how her gift had carried him forward. At the end of the slideshow, the last image appeared, a new home, freshly painted, with a small garden and wide windows. The audience gasped, and the widow turned to him, confused. He explained softly that the house was hers. It was a place she would never have to leave, a place filled with comfort and peace. He had arranged everything so that she would never again worry about money, food, or being alone. The keys were placed into her trembling hand, and the room erupted into another wave of applause. The widow's lips quivered as she tried to speak. Her voice cracked with emotion as she said she had never expected anything in return, that helping him had been enough. But he shook his head, his eyes shining with tears. He told her she had given him more than money that day. She had given him the strength to keep believing when the world felt hopeless. He said no gift in the world could equal what she had done for him, but it was his duty and his joy to try. His mother, who had come to the event as well, stepped forward slowly, her eyes filled with gratitude. She embraced the widow tightly, whispering that no words could capture what her kindness had meant. The two women cried together, bound forever by a moment years earlier that had changed all of their lives. The young man didn't stop with the house. Over the next weeks, he made sure she had caretakers, steady income, and every comfort she had once been denied. He visited her often, bringing food, flowers, and laughter into her quiet home. Neighbors began to notice the change. Where once her house looked tired and forgotten, it now glowed with life. Children played in the garden, visitors came often, and the widow, who had once lived in shadows, was now surrounded by light. For the young man, every act of kindness toward her felt like another way of repaying the debt in his heart. He didn't see it as charity. He saw it as justice, as love coming full circle. The widow, however, insisted she had done nothing extraordinary. She told him that the true gift had been watching him grow into the man he had become. Seeing him strong, respected, and full of compassion was more than she had ever dreamed of. As time went on, their story spread throughout the town. People spoke about the widow who had given $5,000 to save a boy's mother, and how that boy had returned years later to change her life. Parents told their children about it as a lesson in kindness. Teachers shared it in classrooms as a reminder that even the smallest act of generosity could create ripples beyond imagination. Widow spent her remaining years surrounded by love, never again feeling the weight of loneliness. The young man was always near, fulfilling the promise he had made when he was just a desperate boy holding an envelope. And when she finally closed her eyes for the last time, she did so peacefully, knowing her life had left behind a legacy of compassion. The man, standing at her graveside, whispered that she had been his savior, his guide, and his example of what true humanity looked like. He promised to keep her spirit alive by continuing the chain of kindness she had begun. From that day onward, he used his success not for himself, but for others, helping children in need, supporting struggling families, and quietly becoming the same kind of hope she had once been for him. And so, her story did not end with her. It lived on in every life he touched, every act of kindness he passed forward. The world never forgot the widow who had once helped a poor boy save his mother, and the man who years later changed her life forever.